So, yeah. So today's question and discussion is March 24. Um, there's only one variant in it. It's a 5B. It's a 12 marker in which we have to talk about and we have to answer and we have to assess whether economic growth is always desirable for an economy. And we have to give an 8 mark analysis. And obviously, some sort of definitions also आप दे दिया करो. Although I've told you before also many times that हमारे variant में usually there's no mark for the definition. This is March का paper, so it has the definition, but we should always write it just in case. You know, if the word inflation is mentioned, if the word economic growth is mentioned, then what are we writing, by the way? How do we define economic, right? So first thing we have to do is we want to define economic growth. ठीक है? One thing we know is economic growth जो होती है, it's a rate. It's a rate of change. It measures the percentage change in real incomes, your real output in an economy in a given period of time, right? So thoda sa uh, real, I think it's an important term. I think we should always include this word. It can be real national income, it can be real output. Masla nahi hai. But as long as we know that it's a percentage change in real output in a country in a given period of time, I think थोड़ा सा टाइम फैक्टर को भी ले लिया करो. ठीक हो गया. Should we give the formula for it? I think we should give a formula for it. So if you're saying economic growth rate is equals to um, the new GDP minus the old GDP divided by the old GDP times 100. Don't shy away from giving any extra information. Please, you never know whether it can come into count. You know, if you want to give like an example and prove kis tarah se 2000, like I've given this example before also, that let's suppose the new GDP for the new year is like 350 billion US dollars, and in the previous year it was 300 and say $40 billion. So you can do the new minus old, and I think you're going to come up with like 2.9% or something like that. So that would be a good proof that you understand what it is. Okay. But let's not forget what the question is about. It's about, is it always desirable? So first, in your analysis, you must write detailed account of the positive things about the economic growth, and please, just don't do like, economic growth hoti hai, so there's going to be like higher incomes and it will reduce unemployment and, government it can get more taxes. These are fantastic points, but please elaborate sentence structure, give examiner, space to put ticks, you know, because it's a 12 mark. 12 mark is all about how many ticks you can get. Okay? So first, if you have maximum number of ticks, so this is what happens, right? So when I'm checking for an 8 marker, I look at the definition. Okay, the kid gives good understanding. If the marking scheme says, so I'll put 1 mark for it. ठीक है, so I'll put 1 mark कि जी बच्चे को definition पता है. They're mentioning it's the real output for goods and services in the economy. फिर उसके बाद when I'm talking about the positives, every time I'm going to read an explanation, a point explained, I'll give you a mark for it. I'll put a tick next to it. So that's your second tick. That means 2 marks so far I can give you. And then if you write more definitions, so I'll give you more ticks, right? लेकिन problem क्या होगी? Once I've given you like 5, 6 ticks, that means your answer is like level 2, 5 ticks. Okay? Then I'm not gonna give you any more ticks for the advantages. Level 3 पे जाने के लिए, I need you to make a counter argument. So the moment you make a counter argument, I'll give you a couple of ticks over there, and you can get like 7 or 8 out of 8 in your analysis, right? So that's how you have to go about it. There is no other way. तो टिक्स का ख्याल करेंगे, एंड द रीजन व्हाई आई एम सेइंग इज कि कल को जब इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ के ऊपर, अभी तो मैं सिर्फ ये कर रहा हूँ, बट जब हम फिस्कल मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी से डील करेंगे तो द फिस्कल एंड मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी के साथ इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ कैसे अचीव हो सकती है, और इज फिस्कल पॉलिसी द बेस्ट पॉलिसी टू अचीव इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ. So then again, we want to give maximum policies that can help us achieve economic growth and all. Okay, moving on. So from the positive sides, okay, so from the positive sides, I would definitely talk about जब economic growth आती है, especially if it is because of the increase in aggregate demand, तो उसकी वजह से जो है incomes are going to rise. And when incomes are going to rise, so if you're just gonna mention कि लोगों की income बढ़ जाएगी, that's really not a benefit unless you say कि जब लोगों की incomes बढ़ जाएंगी, तो their disposable income is gonna go up, and when incomes go up, then consumers will be able to consume more, and businesses will be able to invest more. तो उसकी basis के ऊपर, it's an improvement. And then you can even suggest, like, if AD is increasing and if consumption is rising, more output is produced, right? So if more output is produced, then resource employment will rise, or this will basically include your labor and your capital, and your natural resources. So thoda sa, even if you want to like give an example, sure, be my guest, give an example for this also, and you can write about that. Here, uh, if you want to give like a counter right now, it's fine. Like, you can give it a little later also. अगर आप चाहते हैं कि फिर you want to talk about economic growth from the potential point of view, AS का shifting to the right, तो उसकी वजह से हम definitely ये बात लिख सकते हैं कि if AS increases and shifts to the right, more output is produced. Um, you know, this will lead to lower prices, right? Lower prices and increase international competitiveness. थोड़ा सा ज्यादा explain करेंगे इस बात को. International competitiveness.
You have to explain the cause a bit.
Not the cause, but you see, I'm sort of like converting this into advantages in a way. But because अगर मैं एक point explain करता हूँ कि economic growth leads to international competitiveness, तो फिर in order for the prices to go down, it should be from the supply wali side. Okay? Even if you like ignore this and you write, examiner will have to correct it and assume that, okay, because अभी मैं एक जो counter argument करूंगा यहाँ पर, I'll make a counter argument that this thing and this thing and this thing is going to lead to inflation and the prices will go up. So the limitation of economic growth is that the prices are going to go up. लेकिन यहाँ पर मैं क्या बात कर रहा हूँ कि यहाँ पे तो जब potential increase होगी, तो that will actually lead to lower prices, and then international competitive will increase, and that will lead to, you know, exports revenue to rise, and improve the balance of payment.
They
Yeah,
overlap.
it may overlap, sure. But as long as I can see some new reasons for those particular things to happen, so I'm fine. I think they will be even fine with the idea that even if you mention if actual economic growth happens and if potential economic growth happens. So just be mindful that every time economic growth is being explained, you should know that there are two types of economic growth that can happen. और दोनों के impacts अलग अलग होते हैं. Both will, the similarity would be that both will increase employment, and both will increase the GDP of the country. But the counter would be that if actual growth is increasing, it may be inflationary, especially if you are reaching full potential. But ये वाली situation के अंदर the prices will actually fall and you can actually have a better in international trade के point of view से, competitiveness के point of view से, even like अगर हम नीचे AS वाली बात करते हैं from here or here, दोनों के अंदर one of the common traits is that it will improve the your GDP basically, right? So what we're saying is that your GDP is going to go up, and that can improve the confidence in the economy, even for the foreigners, and they might be interested in investing in your country. For businesses and consumers, and they will consume more and invest more. And, so there are so many advantages to write honestly in all of this. Um, just write enough that, आपके at least 5 ticks आपको यहाँ मिल जाए. फिर काउंटर के अंदर go for the later 3 marks, or write as many as you can, लेकिन काउंटर प्लीज जरूर कर देना because that's where you lose out otherwise. So in your counter, obviously, we can talk about like I can say like limitations of economic growth. You can start off with like a separate paragraph, and you can talk about how economic growth can be inflationary, um, especially if economy is near or at full capacity. So that will definitely create that. I feel कि अगर इसको आपने सही से explain नहीं किया ना, तो examiner might actually, if जैसे मैंने बोला है उसी तरीके से अगर आप कर दें, तो examiner might end up giving you a too vague over there, TB, that you're not really explaining. तो the explanation इसकी जो होनी चाहिए वो कुछ इस तरह से होनी चाहिए that if economic growth is happening because of a rise in aggregate demand, and if the economy is at potential, then any increase in economic growth will only be inflationary because the real output is at its maximum. However, if the economy is below capacity and has spare capacity available, then actual economic growth may not have inflation. Sometimes what kids will do in a scenario like this is they'll go for that LRAS and AD wale curves, the long run wala. Remember, there's no mark for the diagram, but if you use that diagram, your explanation will get you the mark then, you know? So it's not a bad idea to do that. But inflation ke point ko, you gotta explain it much more clearly. Cost of economic growth के अंदर couple of reasons which I've always said you must explain is one is the pollution, the noise, air, and the smoke pollution, and you must also talk about the resource depletion and exploitation Okay, so you must talk about that. You must also talk about जब हम economic growth की बात कर रहे हैं, I think it's a good one to write also that economic growth की वजह से जो है you can have like unequal distribution of incomes and the rich can get richer and the poor can get poorer along this line. Inequality basically जिसको हम कहते हैं. So that would be these three, in my opinion, are good ones that you can always discuss. So I think that should sum up your analysis for 8 marks and you should get maximum. ठीक है? Going back to the question, what are we asking? Is it always desirable for an economy? Right? So is it always desirable? We need to create scenarios over here. We need to give some added points if it is always desirable. I think over here, ये जो ऊपर हमने एक discussion दिया ना, whether economy is at full capacity or below capacity, I think that would be a good point to elaborate for evaluation all over again. उसमें हम क्या चीज एक नई बात लिख सकते हैं? Because they're saying, is it always, na? So economic growth is not always or will not always be beneficial for an economy if, so evaluation के अंदर not always beneficial. इसको थोड़ा elaborate कर देना. I'm just giving you a point. If the trade-off between inflation and economic growth is not in favor of increase in output. I think I just made it complicated, but simply what I mean to say is, you know how when economic growth happens and AD shifts to the right, if you're at full capacity, it's going to be more inflationary and output's not going to increase much. But just below at full capacity, जब आपके पास एक bottleneck period होता है, this is how we make LRAS, right? So this period right here, before the potential and over here, this according to the Wales का concept and the Scotland की books वगैरह के अंदर, they call this a supply bottleneck. I think we call it an intermediate range. I think supply bottleneck is just a fantastic concept, but I don't think all examiners will be aware of that. What the supply bottleneck is telling us is that if AD increases at this range, there is a trade-off between economic growth and inflation. So what we want to understand at this point is that if economic growth is not rising by much and inflation is rising by more, so then in that case, it might not be a very good uh, idea, or it might not be as beneficial as one would think. लेकिन अगर if you are well below spare capacity, then economic growth का increase will be much greater than the inflationary impact. So that can actually increase the real incomes of the people. So that can be a very that can be an improved situation for the economy. तो उस point of view के अंदर it will be beneficial. तो ये एक ट्रेड ऑफ की हम बात कर सकते हैं. Any points you guys can think of इसके अंदर that we may be able to talk about? Okay, yeah, I can think of more. So when we have economic growth, that simply means economic growth simply means GDP is rising, and when GDP is rising, output is increasing. Now the question is output जो increase हो रहा है वो consumer good हो रहा है या capital good हो रहा है? Is it public goods or is it military goods? You understand? So if economic growth is happening, it depends on what kind of output in the economy is also increasing. If it's more military-based economy and military का output is increasing, it's not really going to benefit the people's living standard. यही चीज एक वहां पे भी हो सकती है that if economic growth is achieved because we're giving up consumer goods and having more capital goods, then in the short run, suffers and businesses benefit. But in the long run, everyone can benefit because अगर कैपिटल गुड्स में आज इन्वेस्टमेंट होती है तो फ्यूचर के अंदर you can make more capital goods and more consumer goods with it. I'm thinking that PPC वाला thing that which we used to talk about back in the day, um, जब हम बोलते थे कि अगर हम कंज्यूमर गुड से कैपिटल गुड की तरफ मूवमेंट करते हैं रिसोर्सेज की तो यू गेट मोर कैपिटल बट यू गिव अप ऑन कंज्यूमर सो हाउ दैट इन द शॉर्ट रन वर्सेस लॉन्ग रन कैन play. So we just want a discussion. Is it always? Answer is it is not always. So, you know, अगर मुल्क में already resources बहुत limited है and you're worried that they're going to get exhausted and sustainability is a problem, so definitely in that case also then we would suggest that, a sustainable economic growth uh, where the resources are not used up too quickly. तो उस तरीके से हम बात कर सकते हैं. I think that would be a much nicer answer in that case. ठीक. All right. एक इसी तरह का क्वेश्चन. Let's take a look. I think answer pretty much. बल्कि मैं जाके देखना चाह रहा हूँ कि 2023 के अंदर let me just take a look at one of the questions. 2023 में March 23 के अंदर. So let's just take a look at कि उसकी because it happened before तो उसकी मार्किंग स्कीम में तो कोई ज्यादा मेजर फर्क तो नहीं है. Let's just take a look at that. Yeah, let's just go over the marking scheme for this one because we pretty much dealt with this question. So फिर no point in talking about exactly the same point again. All right, so the question is assess whether the consequences of economic growth for an economy are always positive. If you notice, this time there is no mark for the definition. It never is. वैसे तो usually it's not is और बल्कि in fact ये तो हमारा variant no March का ही variant है. This time they're not giving the mark for it, right? But I've told you should always write. ठीक है? So your answer examiner is looking for that kid is going to talk about some positive things about economic growth, जिसके अंदर there is a connection of improvement in living standard, but why? थोड़ा सा उसका explanation होना चाहिए. Unemployment कम होगी. Why? थोड़ा ज्यादा explanation होनी चाहिए. जब income increase होगी, there is a high level of aggregate demand. रिडक्शन इन इनकम इनइक्वालिटी मैं तो इसको एक्चुअली काउंटर में डालता हूँ कि एडी के बढ़ने की वजह से इनइक्वालिटी के चांसेस हैं. I think this point I missed out on the previous essay, but I think economic growth can actually lead to higher tax revenues. And agar if you even only write one of the benefit is that if economic growth happens and people's income go up, government can collect more tax revenues, and you stop there. So actually you haven't answered the question. इसमें benefit क्या है? इसमें positive news क्या है कि अगर government के पास ज़्यादा revenue है, so you must write which government could spend on improving people's welfare by spending on education, healthcare, infrastructure, public goods, and all. Right? Increase the business confidence, lead to greater investments. We've talked about that. I think हमने और भी points लिखे थे. Counter के अंदर they want to talk about the depletion of natural resources.
Reduction.
Sorry.
It also says reduction in income inequality.
Yeah, it says reduction in income inequality. Well, you can make a case कि अगर इनकम्स बढ़ेंगी तो यूजुअली मैं तो काउंटर में डालता हूँ इसको। क्योंकि नीचे भी जब जाएंगे ना हम, एन अनइक्वल शेयर ऑफ द बेनिफिट्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ अमंग द पॉपुलेशन विच कैन इंक्रीज इनकम इनइक्वालिटी। तो यूजुअली मैं तो इसको नेगेटिव साइड के ऊपर लेके जाता हूँ। अ, अ, सो जब हम इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ की बात करते हैं, A2 में ये डिस्कशन होता है। आई थिंक ए एस में ये होता है कि नहीं होता, आई थिंक शायद नहीं होता हो, बट डू लेट मी नो अगर होता है तो। We talk about economic growth, rapid economic growth, high economic growth. We talk about inclusive economic growth, and we talk about sustainable economic growth. I'm not sure अगर हम AS में ये तीनों में distinction करते हैं कि नहीं करते हैं. I'm forgetting. Overlapping to me. Do we do it? Do we separate them? Or a discussion between economic growth and economic development? Because I know O level में करते हैं, I know A2 के अंदर हम करते हैं. I'm having difficulty in remembering AS में हम लोग करते हैं कि नहीं करते, बल्कि I can check immediately and tell you. Yeah, we do economic growth or economic development. We do talk about that. We talk about nominal and real, but we don't talk about sustainable and inclusivity. But I think it's a good idea if you know and you can mention it. There's nothing wrong in it. This is what I'm saying. जब एडी बढ़ता है, राइट, तो हमें ये पता है कि एडी के बढ़ने से एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेट होती है, प्राइसेस बढ़ती हैं, इनकम्स बढ़ती हैं। देयर इज नो गारंटी कि वो जो इनकम बढ़ रही है, इट इज नॉट क्रिएटिंग इनकम इनइक्वालिटी। Generally, it does. The people who owns the companies, people who are at the higher hierarchy, they tend to get a better fair share of that growth as compared to the lower skilled individual, and that's a fact.
What does it mean, redistribution of income? The government gets more tax.
Uh, लेकिन वो तो फिर एक अदर डिस्कशन हो गया है। यहाँ पे ये टू, इफ देयर इज अ कॉमा ओवर हियर, दैट मींस देयर टू पॉसिबल सेपरेट पॉइंट्स। ये जो एक लिखा है ना, अ पॉसिबल रिडक्शन इन इनकम इनइक्वालिटी, दैट्स वन पॉइंट। हायर टैक्स रेवेन्यूज व्हिच अ गवर्नमेंट कैन डू इज अ सेपरेट पॉइंट। ठीक है। बिकॉज देन इफ यू आर सेइंग ओ इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ गोज अप, तो फिर गवर्नमेंट विल टैक्स मोर द रिच एंड लेस फ्रॉम द पुअर। तो ये तो वो प्रोग्रेसिव का डिस्कशन चला गया। तो दैट मीन्स वी मेकिंग एन असर्शन ओवर हियर दैट जो टैक्स लगे हुए हैं वो प्रोग्रेसिव टैक्सेशन है, और आप अमीर से ले रहे हैं और गरीब के ऊपर स्पेंड कर रहे हैं। तो दैट्स वेयर दैट इज कमिंग फ्रॉम बेसिकली, बट देयर सर्टेन assertions over there that we are suggesting. When I say that economic growth will lead to higher tax revenues, it's because if income goes up and people are earning more, and people are working, that automatically, whether progressive हो या proportional हो या जो भी हो, indirect taxes हो, taxes will go up in all scenarios, because if more people are working, government gets more taxes. If people's incomes are going up, even if it's proportional, taxes are going up. लेकिन that does not mean कि inequality जो है वो कम हो जाएगी। inequality तो तब होगी जब progressive taxation होगा, जब regressive कम होगा। तो उसका इट्स नॉट ओपन। एंड आई थिंक कि जब आप ज्यादातर कहीं बुक्स वगैरह में भी पढ़ोगे, तो एडी के बढ़ने से they will make more connection with the counter inequality वाला, rather than income equality, inequality कम हो जाएगी। But you can definitely say कि standard of living बढ़ जाएगा, because if people are making more money, they'll spend more, their standard of living will go Inequality, I feel it's a weak point, but it's marking scheme में they're accepting it, so you will definitely get the mark for it. Uh, you just need to argue it correctly, honestly. Yeah. सो काउंटर के अंदर फिर हम जाते हैं, तो काउंटर के अंदर वही नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज का डिप्लीट हो जाना, एनवायरनमेंट का डैमेज हो जाना, पोल्यूशन का बढ़ जाना. प्लीज यू आर गोइंग टू एक्सपैंड ऑन दीज, यू आर गोइंग टू क्लैरिफाई दीज पॉइंट्स, ओनली वर्ड्स विल नॉट गिव यू द मार्क. Unequal distribution of income हो सकती है, possible reduction of quality of life because people will have to work more hours, they may get exploited because economic growth means that people have to work longer hours in order to produce goods and services. um, उस point of view से ये लोग बात कर रहे हैं. So there's so many points, but there's sort of repetition, but there are some few added points over here also. Level two, if it's only one-sided, that means अगर आप सिर्फ positive बहुत सारे दे देते हैं, तो maximum you can get is 5 marks, nothing more than that. फिर 4B को अगर हम देखें, 4B के अंदर हम सॉरी, इज इट ऑलवेज पॉजिटिव? अगेन वही वाली बात है, इवेल्युएशन के अंदर देख लो, आई थिंक दे एटलीस्ट गिवन अ रीजनेबल इवेल्युएशन ओवर हियर. बट देखो, इफ यू अगर ऊपर आपने सिर्फ एडवांटेजेस लिखे हैं, तो फिर इन एवेल्युएशन करके अगर आप काउंटर भी लिखते हैं ना, तो आपको मार्क नहीं मिलता, बाय द वे. बिकॉज दिस इज व्हाट समटाइम्स किड्स डू. Hear me out. They write a lot of advantages or the benefits. Then this is what they do. In evaluation, you know, economic growth may be beneficial, however, फिर उसके कुछ काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स कर देते हैं. ठीक है. बट क्योंकि ऐसे के अंदर देव रिटन इन एवेल्युएशन, अब बात मसला ये हो गया है कि ऊपर एनालिसिस में आपने काउंटर तो किया ही नहीं है, नीचे एवेल्युएशन के अंदर आप ऑल्टरनेटिव लिख रहे हो, तो यू गोना पुट द एग्जामिनर अ लिटिल इन द कंफ्यूजन कि बच्चे ने ऊपर एनालिसिस तो किया नहीं है लेकिन नीचे दोनों साइड का evaluation दे रहा है. So there is a good possibility that you might not get more than 1 mark for your evaluation. इस साल मैंने देखा नवंबर के अंदर फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम ऑनेस्टली दैट ऊपर काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट नहीं हो रहा था, लेकिन नीचे इवेल्युएशन के अंदर एक आध मार्क दे दिया बिकॉज बच्चे ने काउंटर आर्ग्यू कर लिया था और थोड़ी बेहतर एक्सप्लेनेशन के साथ किया था. वरना उससे पहले पिछले 3 साल से तो वी आर नॉट गिविंग मार्क्स सिंस 2023. बिल्कुल भी. सो ओवर हियर इवैल्यूएशन के अंदर क्या जाना चाहिए, द डिग्री ऑफ पोटेंशियल बेनिफिट्स जो है, क्या वो ज्यादा हैं, क्या वो पॉपुलेशन को बेनिफिट देने में ज्यादा जा रहे हैं, या कुछ लिमिटेड लोगों को फायदा पहुंचाने में ज्यादा जा रहे हैं. इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ जो हो रही है, अगर उसमें बहुत ज्यादा कैपिटल इंटेंसिव इम्पैक्ट्स हैं, टेक्नोलॉजिकल बेस्ड हैं और लोग उसकी वजह से अनएम्प्लॉयड हो रहे हैं, तो डेफिनेटली देयर इज अ प्रॉब्लम ओवर देयर. द लॉन्ग टर्म इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ जो है वो ज्यादा अच्छा है बिकॉज इट रिड्यूसेस द प्राइस एंड इंक्रीजेस कैपिटल गुड्स. लेकिन शॉर्ट टर्म के अंदर वी नो दैट कंज्यूमर्स, ये जो अभी हमने पीछे ही बात की थी कि शॉर्ट रन में कंज्यूमर्स माइट एक्चुअली गेट हर्ट. The extent to which the economic growth is sustainable, I think वो मेरी ये एक बात रह गई थी. So economic growth is simply GDP rising. Sustainable economic growth is that if your GDP is rising, it is also long lasting. Your growth rate is not like going like upper and then it crashes down. There is a consistent increase in it for some time, like maybe a decade or something. And resources जो है आप renewable use करते हो, तो डिप्लीशन का भी इतना स्ट्रेस नहीं होता. फिर एक होती है इंक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ. इंक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ इज क्लोजर टू इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट का कॉन्सेप्ट, that yes, output is increasing, income is increasing, but everyone's living standard is rising, not just some class of people, but it's inclusive, it improves everyone's living standard. तो वो आपका इंक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ होता है. इंक्लूसिव इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ इज ऑलवेज डिजायरेबल in comparison to the other. ठीक है? So obviously your final evaluation, sorry, your final conclusion that it is not always beneficial. It depends how the positives and the negatives are affected. You know, so somewhere along this line इस तरीके से आपका आंसर का स्ट्रक्चर होना चाहिए. इसके ऊपर और भी ऐसे है, मेरे ख्याल है एक रह गया है. लेट मी जस्ट शो यू दैट आल्सो. उसके अंदर जो ये वाला है, इसमें एक इन्होंने एक एलिमेंट डाल दिया है, जिसकी वजह से आंसर जो है अब तुम्हारा थोड़ा सा चेकिंग जो होती है ना, when a question is something like this, take a look at it, देन इसकी चेकिंग भी जो होती है ना, वो थोड़ी सी डिफरेंट हो जाती है. देन जो अभी हमने पीछे दो इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ के बेनिफिट्स के क्वेश्चंस देखे ना, इसकी चेकिंग थोड़ी सी डिफरेंट है. इसकी चेकिंग के अंदर, लेट्स गो ओवर द क्वेश्चन फॉर सेकंड. इट्स अ जून 25 वेरिएंट 23 का क्वेश्चन है, जिसके अंदर they're talking about assess the extent to which economic growth is always beneficial for the people and government in the economy. All your points, whichever you're explaining, should be very clear कि ये पब्लिक को अफेक्ट कर रहा है या ये वाला पॉइंट जो है ये गवर्नमेंट को अफेक्ट कर रहा है. Your four arguments should be for people and government. Your counter argument should be for people and government. If you miss out on any of the limitation, level 3 में 6 से ज्यादा नहीं दूंगा मैं. You understand what I'm saying? So if you write a lot of benefits for people, very nicely done. I will think कि ये level 2 का somewhere around बहुत ही अच्छा लिख दिया तो 4 marks. Uh, but I might limit to 3 also. गवर्नमेंट के भी आपने बड़े क्लियरली स्पेल आउट कर दिए. आई गिव यू लेवल 2 5 मार्क्स. ठीक है. फिर आप जब काउंटर करेंगे और पीपल का काउंटर कर देते हैं, आई गिव यू लाइक 6 इश, 6 7. बहुत ही अच्छा लिखोगे काउंटर ऑन द पीपल एंड वेरी क्लियर, तो आई गिव यू 7. 8 मार्क के लिए गवर्नमेंट का भी लिखना जरूरी है. और फिर इवेल्युएशन के अंदर ऑब्वियसली देन यू विल स्टार्ट गेटिंग द मार्क्स फॉर इट. सो व्हेन वी राइटिंग फॉर द पीपल, तो जब हम बात करते हैं कि इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ की वजह से जो है जीडीपी बढ़ता है, लोगों की इनकम्स राइज होती हैं, तो पीपल कैन बाय मोर गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज and consume more goods and services that improves people's living standards. So very obvious, continuously mentioning that, see, we're talking about consumers. How improvements are likely to happen in their life. You don't connect that and you simply say, okay, so consumers' income will rise and their consumption will rise. That's it. That's not enough. Standard of living will improve. Quality of life will improve. More goods and
Good.
services will be available for them to consume. Haji.
But government spending benefits people. So which would that go into?
Uh, why would there be government spending? पहले तो ये बता दो.
From
Because
economic growth.
how? What's the connecting point? Economic growth और government spending बढ़ कैसे रही है? Is there a connecting thing? Like the tax वाली बात
हाँ,
से
maybe.
connect करोगे? Or you want to make government spending the cause of economic growth? Because if you
The
make
cost.
economic growth the cause, then it becomes an assertion that you're assuming that this is what is happening, जिसकी वजह से then people's living standard will improve. The question is
You don't
about,
talk about
huh?
you don't talk about the causes.
Uh, let me think. किस तरह से हो सकता है? So you say if economic growth is happening because of government spending, देखो connection कुछ ऐसे जाना चाहिए. Government spending goes up, economic growth happens because more output is being produced. ठीक है, whether it's fiscal, monetary or whatever. Because the problem is कि ये जब लिख रहे हो ना, तो these are all irrelevant stuff. Economic growth up हो गया, ठीक हो गया. अब इसके आगे matters what you write. So if economic growth is happening, And you're saying the cause is that government is spending on public goods and welfare and infrastructure, जिसकी वजह से लोगों की incomes बढ़ेंगी. So economic growth is rising because of all of those reasons, because of which people's incomes are rising and they can afford more goods and services. That's fine. But that's definitely for the people wala point hai. That's not the government ka advantage wala point.
But you can write.
If you make sure that you connect it to the rising incomes and all of that, you can write. मसला नहीं है. Because मैं तो वहां से देखूंगा जब आप बोलोगे, जब मैं तो वहां से रीडिंग स्टार्ट करूंगा तुम्हारे आंसर की. When you said economic growth will go up as a result of government spending going up. So if economic growth goes up, more output is being produced, more income is generated. So the point actually becomes economic growth leads to more incomes, which allows people to spend more, which was our point ऊपर already. इफ तुमने ऊपर वो पॉइंट लिख लिया है और फिर तुम गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग के साथ ये पॉइंट रिपीट कर रहे हो तो फिर नहीं मिलेगा मार्क. इट्स अ रेपिटेशन. We'll just simply put seen over there that it's a repetition of the idea. Okay. So economic growth, income goes up. यहाँ पे इन्होंने एक real GDP per capita का word use किया है, which just simply means income per person is going up, income is going up. दोनों, it's fine if you write that. It's fine if you write simply income goes up. फिर उसके अलावा as output increases, employment rises, new kinds of jobs are created, unemployment कम हो जाएगी. Again, this is from the people's point of view. Um, I would actually इसको थोड़ा सा इसकी explanation को मैं थोड़ा सा people related करूंगा. That reduce unemployment, which will allow people to earn more and spend more. थोड़ा सा एक ये connecting point डाल दूंगा so that this point becomes specifically कि हाँ जी, look how people are gonna get affected, although workers are people. So I guess we're fine with that. Consumer का term लिखा होता तो फिर वो शायद problem होता. People लिखा है तो I guess this is perfectly fine because workers are people. Higher incomes and spending generates more taxes. So economic growth goes up, higher incomes, government is getting direct taxes, government is getting indirect taxes without even raising the tax rates. So government is going to get money, which they can invest into public healthcare and welfare and all of that, which can improve people's living standard also. It's a connecting. Government will get more tax revenue. I think that is the beneficial wala side, and then they can easily do some investment projects and all. And they might not need to borrow money. ये भी हो सकता है. आप ये भी लिख सकते हो. That could be an advantage. That if government is making good tax revenues, so they might not need to borrow and pay interest on those money. And ये भी लिख सकते हैं कि government और ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा projects कर सकेगा. फिर sustained economic growth can boost investment and consumption as expected about future incomes and profit rises. ये people के point of view से नहीं लिखा हुआ. एक ये consumption का word में भी people के साथ linked है, firms के साथ linked है. I think इस वाले point को थोड़ा सा और ज्यादा elaborate होके clear देना चाहिए कि government और people के साथ किस तरीके से ये link हो रहा है exactly जाके. Although we see it's a certain repetition happening, if you can think of more points are definitely acceptable also. Even I can think of something like ये मैं कर सकता हूँ, by the way, economic growth की वजह से, output होने की वजह से you can export the goods international market के अंदर, जिसकी वजह से revenues आएंगे और countries government के foreign reserves बढ़ जाएंगे, which will allow them to import goods and services and things like that. तो मैं वहां से उसको गवर्नमेंट से कनेक्ट कर सकता हूँ. स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट इज इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ. फिर सो इट्स अ टू साइडेड. एटलीस्ट दोनों का डिस्कशन हो गया है, गवर्नमेंट का भी हो गया है. अच्छा, ये जरूरी नहीं है दैट यू नीड टू हैव लाइक 3 points और 2 points or something. You can even have like 1 point for anyone and it qualifies कि हाँ जी आपने, you've talked about the other thing also. Not talking is a big problem. कॉस्ट के अंदर we're talking about किस तरह से इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ की वजह से अगेन द पॉइंट के रिच और पुअर के बीच में गैप क्रिएट हो जाता है और लोगों के लिए जो है यू नो सेम इम्प्रूवमेंट नहीं आती. इट्स नॉट इंक्लूसिव एनी मोर. सम पीपल गेट रिच एंड गेट द लग्जरीज, अदर्स आर स्ट्रगलिंग. उस तरह से हो सकता है. पोल्यूशन और उसकी वजह से डिप्लीशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेज और एनवायरनमेंट हार्म होने की वजह से लोगों को बीमारियां हो सकती हैं. पीपल गेट अफेक्टेड एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ ऑल दिस पोल्यूशन. जैसे आप लाहौर की बात कर सकते हैं. इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ की वजह से इन्फ्लेशन हो सकती है. जब एडी बढ़ता है लोगों के लिए महंगाई हो जाएगी, रियल इनकम्स गिर जाएंगी, परचेसिंग पावर गिर जाएगी. ओके. गवर्नमेंट के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से कोई काउंटर नहीं आया अभी तक. वी नीड टू मेक श्योर दैट व्हेन वी राइटिंग समथिंग उसका गवर्नमेंट को किसी तरह से लिंक करो. समथिंग लाइक ये जो डिप्लीशन वाला पॉइंट है एंड वी सेड कि हाउ पीपल will have to breathe that and they might fall sick. I think we can talk about that over here. The government may need to do expenditures in order to manage these disasters that are taking place, and that might increase government spending and create a deficit for them or something. I think ये होना चाहिए था. इस क्वेश्चन के अंदर मिसिंग है. I would have definitely would have looked at whether kids have written government का negative side or not. Uh, so इसके अंदर they haven't specifically mentioned, but I'm sure meeting के अंदर जरूर. फिर जब हम evaluation के ऊपर आते हैं, so requires an assessment of the benefits and the cause of increased economic growth, which may refer to specific groups. When you're talking about in this one, we can't just write about anyone. It has to be about consumers, people, and it has to be about governments. People के अंदर firm भी एक हद तक आ सकती है if you connect it to the incomes and the employment and investments and eventually affecting people's lives. तो आप कर सकते हो. Economic growth is in the interest of both uh, the people and the government because दोनों के results एक ही तरफ एक ही direction में move करते हैं. If government is benefiting and people are not benefiting, that's a problem. If people are benefiting and government is not getting the fair share, that's a problem. So they both have to have an improvement together. एक second, let me just go see the question. Extent to which economic growth is always beneficial for the people. I think यहाँ पे मैं वो sustainability की बात एक दफा और equality की बात I would definitely mention over here. Economic growth is beneficial for the people and the government as long as it is creating equality. The government will not have to put pressure on certain segments of the economy. They can benefit everyone. So इस तरीके से I think along that line. लेकिन your benefit and cost of economic growth for specific groups. यहाँ पे देखो ये जो लिखा है ना may refer to specific groups. What this means is कि economic growth हो रही है तो how retirees are going to get affected versus how a working person is going to get affected. How skilled versus unskilled, rich versus poor. This is what they're talking about, different specific groups of people in the economy. ठीक?
People should talk about different groups and like workers, employed, unemployed.
You can talk about them also, how economic growth will treat them also. आई वाज थिंकिंग कि अगर हम सिंपल अगर थोड़ा सा स्पीड ऑफ इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ के साथ भी ग्रुप्स के ऊपर बात कर लें तो दैट विल बी फाइन ऑल्सो बिकॉज इफ यू आर रैपिडली हैविंग इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ तो इनइक्वालिटी डेफिनेटली आती है. सम आर बेनिफिटिंग एट द एक्सपेंस ऑफ मेनी अदर. तो आप उसकी भी बात कर सकते हो द स्पीड ऑफ इकोनॉमिक बट इट हैज टू कनेक्ट टू द segment of the society somehow. Otherwise, evaluation में marks नहीं मिलेंगे if it's not talking about specific groups of people. Okay? Yeah.
and